Welcome to She Persisted. I'm your host, Sadie Sutton. Every Friday, I post interviews about mental health, dialectical behavioral therapy, and teenage life. These episodes break down my mental health journey, teach skills to help you cope with life, and showcase testimonials from individuals, including teens just like you. Whether you've struggled yourself or just want to improve your mental fitness, this podcast is your inspiration to live a life you love and keep persisting. This week on She Persisted.
I used to always want to check out of my reality. Like I would do whatever it took to check out and to not be present in my life. And now I want to check into it. Like I really like being in my life, even when it's really messy and unpredictable and challenging. There's always opportunities for growth. And when that perspective shifts for you and you learn how to be okay with sitting in the discomfort of your life, that pain and that suffering and those challenges begin to mold you and shape you, and you begin to grow and evolve.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I've been wanting to do this for now almost a year, so exciting that we're finally doing this.
I am so happy to be here. Anything for my Sadie.
So, diving right in, let's hear you, your story, your journey, how it all started, all the craziness, going back, I don't even know how many years, but hearing your growth and your journey and that complete 180 that happened.
So I'm about to turn 30, which is like wild.
30,
I can't.
flirty, and thriving.
30 feels huge. 30 feels like monumental, especially for someone like me who when I was in my active addiction didn't necessarily think I would live past like 24, 25.
Yeah.
So to be here is a really remarkable thing, and I as much as I'm like, ew, 30, I'm also like, okay, this is a good this is a good place to be in. But yeah, I got sober when I was 19, so it's been a decade of recovery, and not just recovery from drugs and alcohol, but from life. That's, I guess that was kind of my biggest takeaway as I approached my 10 years, is that like it's not just about recovering from substances. The substances really aren't the problem. The problem is like our own personal pain and our collective suffering. I think if COVID's really illuminated anything, if this last presidency illuminated anything, it was that the collective is really suffering. So I grew up in a really dysfunctional household. My dad was a pretty aggressive alcoholic. He was physically violent towards me. My mom was this kind of free-spirited, pot-smoking hippie, but like in the turn of snap of a finger, she could rip you apart. And my parents separated when I was a toddler, and so I never really had a nuclear family, and we were really dysfunctional. I had a lot of sexual abuse that was going on in my home that lasted from 4 to 7, picked back up again at the hands of babysitters and my dad's girlfriends, and eventually when I was 17, I would be raped, and I kept it all a secret. I just kept it all a secret because, well, really, if I'm being honest, because of like the programming that I received from society, which basically said that, I was not pure, not clean, not worthy, not lovable, because I was damaged and messy and out of control, right? It's interesting because my mom and I talk a lot about this in the Life Reset course, as you know, like the different ego states that we turn to as a result of our life experience. And for me, for that big first chunk of my life, I'd say 0 to maybe 11, I was really an adaptive child. Like I just
Mhm.
was a people pleaser. I was the adult, right? I had to grow up really fast. I tried to make everyone happy, keep the peace, despite the fact that like I was on a regular basis dealing with chaos. I became that
Yeah.
adaptive child. And I'm sure many of your listeners will understand this switch that happens when eventually we say enough. And when we say enough and we've had that much trauma and no support, most of the time we don't go, oh, I'm going to go to therapy, I'm going to get help, and I'm going to get better, which would be moving into our adult, right? Especially because
Yeah.
we're so young. But for me at 11, I was just like, screw this. And I became the
And it
rebellious
makes so much
child.
sense.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
rebellious child in me, she came out and she, woo, like she was just guns a blazing, like
Mhm.
anti-authority, don't tell me what to do, started using drugs, started getting boyfriends, started partying, started getting really out of control in quotes, because it's so funny that like anyone would, the comparison to like in control would be, like my parents were not in control of me, and it's like my parents were out of control too.
Mhm.
There was no
Yeah, and you were
control
controlling
having
your emotions, your
yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So the shift took place, and I started exploring with substances, and not with just substances but with food, and escaping through like media. Back then we didn't have phones like we do today, but
Yeah.
I was trying to like be in another universe, anywhere but with me, right? And that's what's so
Mhm.
interesting is
Mhm.
like before the drugs, there was clearly a problem, and most people don't look at it that way. They go, "Oh, the drugs are the problem." Right? Like your life got really bad because you were on drugs. And it's like, "No, my life was really bad, and then I found drugs, which was a temporary
Yeah.
solution to my pain, and then that pain kept growing, and so I needed more and more drugs." And then
Mhm.
eventually my behaviors became out of control because my desire to stay high was far more important to me than anything else. So
Mhm.
by the time I was 16, I would become an opiate addict. By the time I was just shy of 18, I would become a full blown heroin addict. By the time that I was 19, I would get sober. So that kind of just shows you how fast the progression of my using just was really quick. And there was a number of
Yeah.
factors in that. Obviously, having more access. We ended up getting the TV show when I was 17, started filming when I was 19. And with an increase in funds, all of a sudden it was like party city, right? Like
Mhm.
I could just
Yeah.
party and use drugs as much as I wanted or needed to. And, also by the time that I was 19, I was also twice convicted felon. So I would end up going to jail the first time for burglary, getting sober in jail, right? Kicking
Mhm.
cold turkey, horrible experience, obviously, very painful.
Yeah.
And then after I kicked in jail, I kind of had that like epiphany moment that a lot of people talk about, which is like, okay, you're a mess, drugs are bad. You should probably not do drugs anymore. But again, it goes back to this whole thing of like, it's not the drugs though. It's not the drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the pain. And so when that 18-year-old, or I was yeah, I just turned 19. 19, I turned 19 4 days before I went and did serve my sentence. 4 days after.
Mhm.
So I turned 19 and yeah, literally 4 days after, which is now weird because that's my daughter's birthday. Bizarre that that worked out that way. But anyway, so went in jail and got out. The pain was too bad. Went right back to drugs. Using escalated to the point where I couldn't show up to probation anymore. I was spending every waking hour like panhandling and trying to find money for drugs. And then all of a sudden, before I knew it, it had gotten so bad that the cops were after me. My probation
Yeah.
officer was like looking for me, and it was just a mess. And I ended up going back to jail, kicking all over again. And by the grace of God, I ended up getting sentenced to a year in treatment instead of 3 to 6 years in prison, which is what I was facing. And now my
Mhm.
treatment experience is very different from your treatment experience.
Yeah.
Although I will say that there are similarities, and as someone who's like a treatment provider today, oh, I strive to make the
Mhm.
experience that our clients have very different. So the whole idea of like behavioral health and behavioral modification is just so ass backwards, because like as if my usage was a matter of a behavior. If it was a behavior,
Yeah.
then the amount of times I wanted to stop, the amount of willpower I had would have worked, right? Because like being hooked on
Yeah.
drugs isn't a matter of willpower. Like when we are like that desperate and that broken, I mean, like my addiction was so. I'm gonna spare everybody all of the details, but it was the most demoralizing and inhumane and just awful. I mean, like awful experience. And so, when I wanted to get sober, the countless times that I did, it wasn't a matter of willpower, right? Because I had the will, like I had the desire. I just could not
Yeah.
get sober. And so, what's interesting about my experience in treatment is that it wasn't the therapy that kept me sober at all. I mean,
Mhm.
therapy is great. Did it for a very long time. Have been back on and off throughout the last 10 years of my sobriety. But what
Mhm.
really kept me going was community, was finding people who felt the same way that I did, that had been through the same
Yeah.
things that I had, people who, like, it became very clear to me that, like, oh, I'm not crazy. Like,
Yeah.
my parents are crazy, right? Like, um, this world is crazy. And that's why I think I love Johann Hari's work so much, right? His book, Lost
Yeah.
Connections, created a profound shift in in my life, because it just so clearly lays out the ways in which society impacts us in such a profound way, our interpersonal relationships and just the way that we are operating. It's just no longer sustainable. So then, and of course, like we have to take personal responsibility. I'm not negating the fact, like no one stuck a needle in my arm, right? Like
Mhm.
there's like
Mhm.
a balance here, right? But it's like we've spent so much time focusing on one end of the perspective, which is that like it's the addict's fault, they don't have any willpower. Even the disease model, I don't necessarily agree with. We're not diseased. I mean, that
Yeah.
helped us and got us further and maybe made society's view of us a little bit more humane, gave us some humanity back when it came
Mhm.
to the suffering that people were going through. But yeah, there's definitely this balance there. So the community really is what kept me sober and kept me going. And of course there's been work, right? The work happened. Like
Yeah.
God, universe, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, like we will always be presented opportunities in our life to heal from our trauma. And over the last 10 years, I've spent most of that time working through all of those limiting
Mhm.
beliefs and all of that pain and all of the suffering. And that's really what like relieved the obsession for me from substances.
Mhm.
Now, when I was in my early years of sobriety, I was like, how am I never gonna have a glass of wine for the rest of my life? I was 19, right? Like I
Mhm.
couldn't possibly
Yeah.
imagine how that would be the case. And
Mhm.
now it's not even like a thought that crosses my mind. And this is how I came up with the title of the podcast of my podcast, Recovering from Reality, with Evan, it was like I used to always want to check out of my reality. Like I would do whatever it
Mm-hmm.
took to check out and to not be present in my life. And now I want to check into it. Like I really like being in my life, even when it's really messy and unpredictable and challenging. There's always opportunities for growth. And when that perspective shifts for you and you learn how to be okay with sitting in the discomfort of your life, that pain and that suffering and those challenges begin to mold you and shape you, and you begin to grow and evolve. And so recovering from reality was really born out of that. And I think that that's that's really where like I live and operate out of today. It's like these are all opportunities for growth, and I really like being here. Like in the
Mm-hmm.
fullness of life. So that's like a very condensed version of of my story.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to dive into the idea that it wasn't the drugs, it wasn't these different behaviors, because I
Hmm.
think that's something that gets a lot of focus, especially in teen treatment and teen presentations. It's really getting rid of whether it's drug use, self harming, suicidality. The goal is not to heal those underlying feelings, the goal is to get rid of the behaviors. And so I love your perspective on how these are just it's how the pain is presenting itself, and I really want to hear your
Exactly.
perspective on that and how we can shift that in the treatment world.
Yeah, I mean, uh, that's that's really what it is. It's like the negative, and I put negative in quotes because it's not really a
Mhm.
negative behavior. We have to change that too, because drugs saved my life,
Yeah.
right? Like they
Mhm.
actually ended up saving my life, because I probably would have taken my life had I not had drugs, because of the amount of pain that I was
Mhm.
in. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
the first thing.
Mhm.
So if drugs or self harm or whatever it might be is a solution, a temporary solution, but is a behavior that is harming the person and the family unit,
Mhm.
then we have to go, oh, okay, so this is causing pain for this person, but it's also their solution. So, how do we fix this? Okay, so we have to look at that underlying cause of the pain, and we have to be willing to go in and heal that. But here's the other thing,
Mhm.
though, Sadie. It's like each person's pain is their own. Everyone has the right to heal it when they're ready to. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that it's really, I have a really hard time with people forcing that on other people. I think that
And
there's
that's
a
so
way.
prevalent in the teen
Yeah.
treatment industry because there's that lack of consent to entering that journey. You're just
Mm-hmm.
kind of thrown into it.
Yeah. And I think we as a society need to ask ourselves this: why is this person's behavior, addiction, whatever it might be, bothering us so much? Is it because I'm
Yeah.
afraid for people to think that I have a challenging kid? Is it because our family looks different? Is it because it's triggering unmet stuff in myself and my own psyche? Is it because I know that I've played a part in this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like when we start focusing more on ourselves and not so much on that other person, and we start having
Mhm.
empathy for that person will begin to heal just through that, right? Like some of the most
Yeah.
profound work that I've, had the honor of participating in with others when facilitating care for somebody who's using substances or self-harming or whatever it might be is is really working with the family to heal themselves first, and then dropping all of the shame and all of the shaming, right? And presenting our case, I guess, because that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to present this case in hope that this person heals.
Yeah.
And so when we do so from a place of unconditional love with no manipulation, no shaming, and no judgment, usually that person who's hurting begins to feel safe enough to open up and to recognize that they are unconditionally loved. And there is no greater and more powerful motivator than feeling unconditionally loved. Most of
Yeah.
these kids don't feel unconditionally loved. The love is very much so conditional. You use drugs, you know, we're going to shame you. I feel a little less loved. You know what I mean? It's just like you self harm, you have sex, you're gay, you're whatever it might be. We love you a little bit less, right? And unconditional love is so powerful. It is, like, I meet you where you're at. You don't have to change for me. I'm concerned about you just because I love you so much. And I am so sorry that I ever tried to make you change or to be any different. And I am so sorry for any part that I've played in harming you in your life. And like, I want to talk about this and I want to have these conversations and I want to take responsibility for my part and I want to be a part of your life no matter what, whether you choose to stop using drugs or not. And I know for some parents that are like, this is radical. You're telling your teen that they can use drugs, you know. And no, I mean, like, if the goal though is to get this person off drugs, interventions and behavioral health treatment is not going to be the golden ticket. I can guarantee you that. And what happens, especially at these places now, we're seeing the fact that they get put on so many drugs. They
Yeah.
end up walking
Mm-hmm.
out on like 15 different meds. And those meds fuck your brain up for the rest of its life. Right? It's
Yeah.
like, and then they end up with me, right? At 35, right? They start at 16. They start at 16, and then they're in the revolving door of toxic treatment centers, and you're out, potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and they're 35
It's
years
so
old,
expensive.
and they're addicted to meth and heroin, and you're like, why? How did we get here? It's like, because
It's obvious.
because we've never dealt with like the root, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like, and that's the thing too, is like, thankfully, like, I stayed close enough to my new family that I was making, and had been in recovery enough to be able to start setting boundaries with my family, and they started to get better, right? But for many, the families never get better. They do this like bullshit therapy, right? Which is so
Mm-hmm.
not productive
Yeah.
because no one's really doing the work. No one's really doing the work. We're still pointing fingers as if the person who is expressing the pain in the family unit, who is,
Mm-hmm.
some people would call them the black sheep, right? Some people would identify them as the identified patient or the problem child or whatever it might be. And we're not looking at like the dysfunction in the rest of the family unit. And so these
Yeah.
people get sober or they get better at these facilities and then they go home and the work is not sustained.
And then you
They're being
immediately relapse because you're right back in the toxic environment.
and why would you not? Because they're now triggering not only your personal pain again, but the belief systems that we have about who we are and our worthiness and our security and our safety and all of those things too.
Yeah.
So it's like well, the only thing that is constantly reliable in my life is self-harm, is this eating disorder, is the drug addiction, is escaping with these relationships, is sex, is whatever that behavior is. And so it becomes really challenging to stay sober because we're usually going back to the same environment that we were trying to escape from in the first place.
Mhm. Yeah. So if you are truly healing the root of the problem, not this
Mm-hmm.
presentation of drug addiction, self harm, toxic relationships. Is that truly finding unconditional love for yourself? Is it rewiring belief systems? Is it building your family of choice? What does that mean to truly heal your root pain?
Whoa, oh God, Sadie, it's all of it.
Such a loaded question.
um, I mean, and it's the belief that like there was nothing wrong with you in the first place.
Yeah.
There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with you in the first place. And I'm all about it. Like, I'm all about shadow work and underlying belief
Mhm.
systems and EMDR and trauma therapy and emotional freedom technique tapping. I love all of those things, but I guess like for me, it is just constantly reminding myself that like I'm okay. Like I am not a problem. Like
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
my fear, because fear is something that still comes up for me, not as frequently as it used to, not even close, but it still rears its ugly head when it wants to, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes out of that fear, I can be hyper reactive. And so I have to remind myself, like, this isn't real. You're
Mhm.
okay.
Mhm.
Nothing's going on here. Everything
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
fine, right? But I think everyone's journey is unique. So I started in AA, like fundamentalist. I joined the Pacific group, which is so hardcore. Started
Mhm.
in AA, and I felt a really strong spiritual calling that to leave. Like I was like, this is not the place for me. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they're saying here, and I found myself leaving meetings feeling worse off than I did when I got there, which is
Yeah.
that's not a good thing, right? And
No.
I tried to stick it out for a long time, and then my sponsor, who had 24 years of sobriety, left, and then I left shortly thereafter. And then I dove into years of trauma therapy on and off. And I even did transcranial magnetic stimulation for my depression. I saw hypnotists and spiritual healers, and I've done like everything underneath the sun. And I don't know exactly what created that like final shift, but it was just this moment that I had in meditation. And I am an avid meditator, and I will say that I think everyone needs to be meditating every single
Mhm.
day. But I had this shift where I just felt profoundly connected to all that is. And in that moment, it was like this deep knowingness that everything's okay. Like you're always okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like it's all good.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that
Which
was
is
a
so
big moment
crazy
for
because
me.
it's like all of these presentations of people trying to heal that pain is just to hear that they're okay. It's okay and it'll be
Mhm.
okay. Like that was what everything was, and you found that and you found it in yourself, which is just so, I don't want to say crazy because that's not the right word, but
No,
amazing
but
and
that's how it
profound.
should
And
be.
yeah.
That's the thing,
Yeah.
is like we're always looking. I guess what I feel is that a lot of the times when we're seeking
Mhm.
through meditation, or not through meditation, through, sorry, a lot of times when we're seeking through therapy, I'm not shitting against therapy again. Like, I am not anti-therapy. Through AA, through a sponsor, through whatever it might be,
Mhm.
we are looking to others to fix us still. Just the same way we
Mhm.
are looking for drugs or alcohol or whatever it might be to fix us. And the
Mhm.
gift of meditation is realizing that, like, you're the guru, you're the healer, you're the healed. You
Mhm.
can heal. Like, you're
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You're it, literally.
Mm.
And I found this, through I mean, a plethora of books. Just nonstop reading, but through like reading and exploring my mind, through journaling, through all of that. And so today, even in the work that I do, I always remind people, like, I'm not here to be your spiritual guru that you turn to for like every question that you have. I'm simply here to like illuminate that in you, because you
Mhm.
have that. I don't cling on to every word that I say. And it's interesting because, like, I'll make a misstep on social media or whatever it might be, and I go, see, this is it. This is why I
Mhm.
always say, do not put me on a pedestal. Do not, because I am human. I'm not
Yeah.
here to, like, be anything else. So, yeah, it was a moment for me, and I never since life has just gotten a lot easier.
Yeah. So I have two different follow-up directions I want to go. I first want to go ACE score. The amount of
Mm.
pain that you experienced as a kid, I want to dive into that of how far the impacts of that go. So, talk to me. I've heard you say this so many times that according to your ACE score, you shouldn't be alive right now. Like, this emotional
Yeah.
pain is not insignificant. It's not discomfort that you feel and then look for these outlets. Like, there
Hmm.
are profound impacts of feeling that much chaos as a kid. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. I mean, and the ACE score carries with you. Like, I feel so fortunate that I got sober when I did, because I had the next 7 years before my brain was fully developed to heal without
Yeah.
using substances. But a lot of people don't have that. Yeah. So the adverse childhood experience study changed the way that I looked at recovery. And you can check this out by going to ACEs Too High and doing the test for yourself. But yeah, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente put together this really comprehensive data that looked at not just addiction, but obesity and a number of other chronic,
Diabetes, heart health.
yeah,
Yeah.
chronic conditions that their patients were dealing with. And they decided that they were going to put together this list of 10 negative experiences, early childhood traumas that you can experience. And then they would collect all of the data, and they would look at the increases of different health outcomes based off of how much trauma you experience as a child. And what's so interesting about this is it's not just the things that you would think of, like addiction, like suicide, mental health impacts. It was at cancer, at diabetes, at all of the big killers
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the world. And so, yeah, my score is a 9 out of 10. They say anything over 4 is like way too high. And I am really lucky to be alive today, because it increases my chance of suicide by some, hundreds of
Exponential
percentile,
amount.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Mhm.
But what's so interesting about the ACEs score, so okay, so they're like, okay, so we have this data now. Like, we know that early childhood trauma impacts you substantially. They looked at the first
Mhm.
7 years, the first 14 years, and the first 18 years, right? And we know this, but then the question becomes like, well, but not all of the people experience this, right?
Mhm.
Like, some people score a 6 on the test, which is considered high, and they don't end up hurting themselves. And so they go, okay, so what is the thing that is changing this variability?
Mm-hmm.
And it's resilience. And so they have a follow-up test that you can do to check your resiliency. So it turns out that I am, even though I don't feel like I'm a resilient person, I am a very resilient person.
Yeah.
And so they looked at these other factors, right? Things that were like, did you have access to therapy? Did you have a school teacher that you felt safe with? They go through these
Mm-hmm.
questions and they measure your resilience. And so for me, even though like, yeah, my mental health and all that has been affected, and even in sobriety, I've gone through periods of great depression in sobriety. So we look at the resilience and it offsets that ACE score, which is
Mm-hmm.
so interesting because it's like, and here's another perfect example of why like drugs in themselves aren't inherently addictive. It's like most 14-year-olds get their wisdom teeth pulled and don't end up becoming heroin addicts. I
Yeah.
got my wisdom teeth pulled, tried the drugs, and was like, oh yeah, baby, this is it. And then I was
Mm-hmm.
like fully addicted to the drugs, right? And it's like the
Mm-hmm.
difference is the trauma and the pain. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yes. Yes. So we talk big traumas, big T traumas. There's also
Mm.
little T traumas.
Mhm.
So the amount of pain that you experienced was huge. It was overwhelming. It took over every part of your life. And I think one of the amazing parts of your philosophies, might be the right word, is that even without checking these ACE score boxes, individuals can feel a lot of pain and invalidation and feeling misunderstood from little T traumas. What are those? And yeah, just kind of talking about how this question is going a little bit all over the place.
No, I get where you're
Um,
going. I get where you're going. So it's interesting because the ACE score does look at what I call big T traumas: divorce,
mhm,
sexual abuse, parent goes to prison, parents are alcoholics. They look at these like big things.
yeah.
And so, and then I have these like little T traumas, which, let's just say someone's had 4 little T traumas. I would equate that to like one big T trauma. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not like a scientist, so I can't measure these things. But what I'm saying is this, that like the the parent that has an unhealthy relationship with their inner child, who hasn't healed their inner child, expressing their bullshit onto their kids,
Mhm.
traumatic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the things that we don't, a car accident
Mhm.
where everybody walked away fine, but your parents didn't have enough emotional regulation themselves, that instead of being able to be there for you and explain that everything's okay, they just shut you down and told you to be quiet, right?
Mhm.
It is these like micro and sometimes macro aggressions that we have towards each other. And it's living like in this society that is so toxic. I think it's harder for the older generations to understand this because they didn't grow up. Like, I'll just say for me as a millennial, right? So I grew up in a time where I witnessed and saw the Twin Towers falling at school. And then proceeded to hear constantly about this war that we were starting to see play out in the Middle East. A time
Mhm.
where like we were starting to have lots of mass shootings at school and we were having drills. A time where we had a huge depression, right? A world where social media was booming, and now I was being constantly bombarded with content about race and the suffering of people of color and of women and of children right before my eyes, which is something that like we never saw that before. And that's
Yeah.
awful. But it's like we're starting to go through this like awake period, right? Now we have all this like content and we're consuming this content, and a lot of the times the content is very intense. And then also Not to mention like the like targeting of young women, boys too, but of young women about their looks and pop culture and all of this stuff, right? So like you have
Mhm.
so much influence going on and so much collective trauma on top of individual trauma, and it's like it makes sense to me why people are using drugs. It
Mhm.
makes sense to me why like all of the moms are drinking by 3 p.m. and popping Xanax. Like that makes sense to me. I mean,
Yeah.
not to mention the fact that a lot of us don't have nuclear families anymore. We're raising children on our own. The trauma of having to become a two-income household, I think was huge for people. Huge,
Mhm.
right? We're in the rat race. We're in a literal rat race. We're racing to this finish line, which is just dying. And
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, that's a miserable existence. And I think you're seeing your generation saying, we're not fucking doing this. We're not,
Mhm.
they're like we're watching on TikTok unfold this like anti capitalist Gen Z revolution happening. And I'm like, yeah, why do we have a 40-hour work week? Yeah, why don't we have health care,
Mhm.
maternity leave, child care? It's
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
access to
Yeah.
college. Like it's people who are saying
Mhm.
like enough. We're finally at the point where we're like this isn't working anymore. I mean, the post Reagan world, especially, and your audience might not understand this, but one day they will. That
Mhm.
shift where we really became focused on this hyper individualistic society where we idolize the individual over caring about the collective, and it is killing us. It's killing us. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people feel that because, and we do, and I'll tell you why. Because when we used to operate and live in tribes, we would feel everything. And certain people, most of the tribe especially, would like feel when there was danger coming way before the danger came.
Mhm.
We have more than these, basic senses that everyone talks about. We
Yeah.
know, we know that we're suffering. We just turn it off because we don't want to deal with it and we
Mhm.
can't
And
feel it
we're in sensory overload to be aware of that
all the
feeling.
time.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
why they want you on the social media apps all the time, is because it doesn't create space for questioning what's happening out there
Mhm. Yeah.
or what's
Yeah.
happening in here inside of us.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
It makes sense, especially what you're saying about having the individual over the collective, going back to your
Mhm.
own journey with sobriety when you leaned into that community and found that rather than just
Mhm.
being isolated in your own experience. That was that shift. That was what changed things. So it's all connected. It's the same patterns over and over and over again that are leading to these feelings of suffering and pain where people become overwhelmed and lean on all these different ways to cope with that and survive through what they're feeling.
Exactly.
It's crazy. So, wrapping up, I'm doing this new thing where I get people's like top 3 favorite mental health things that they're doing recently.
Mm.
So, what are your 3 things, whether it's like a TV show that you just love or being outside, something like that? What are your top 3 at the moment?
Well, meditation's number one, always and forever.
Mhm.
Meditate, meditate, meditate. So meditation is huge. Yeah, I think being in nature, and I know it sounds so cliche, but when's the last time that you stuck your feet in the dirt or in the sand or in the grass? It just makes you feel so good. Being in nature
Yeah.
barefoot, sunshine, it is that time of year now where we get to enjoy the beautiful sunshine. It is
Mhm.
so regenerative and restoring. I can't say enough good things. And then, and I know this is going to sound so gross, I mean, I can't do the TV thing. once you have the spiritual awakening, it's like I can't watch Housewives anymore. Like I just
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's like I have to be so selective about the type of content that I consume because I just have no desire to consume that type of content. But a show that I really do love right now and always, but that I've
Mhm.
been watching lately is The Office. It's so good.
I I've seen
Steve
it like 8
Carell is a
times.
genius.
It's the comfort show.
Yeah.
So good.
I can watch it, watch it again, watch it again. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. I bought the whole series on iTunes at the beginning of the pandemic for like $200. Freaking love that show. So
It's
I would
so
definitely
good.
say that, like, but staring into my husband's eyes for like 30 seconds and connecting,
Mhm.
holding my children and hugging them. I mean, all of
Mhm.
these things, connecting to nature, connecting to other humans, and connecting to our inner and higher selves, so important.
It's living. It's all of these things that you forget to experience when you're consumed by your suffering because you're just surviving through the moment. But when you get out of that and you can really just be present, which is something that's so hard when you're suffering, there's all these beautiful moments and it's why people love life, which was something I didn't understand for so long. I was like, why do people enjoy
Mhm.
this? This is terrible. We're just going through the motions. But it's when you get out of that place of pain, there's
Yeah.
so much to appreciate.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, like living in this very like toxic male-dominated patriarchal society, like when you choose like no, like I'm gonna take care of myself and I don't care to be in this like I was saying this rat race anymore,
Mhm.
it just frees up space for like just being. In a world that is constantly pushing you to do all the time, we gotta have
Mhm.
space to be.
We forget to do that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I am so glad we got to do this, and I'm so happy that we finally got to sit down. It's crazy that I was on your podcast before you came on mine, but I wanted to make sure my editing and production, all of that was top notch. So I'm so glad that you came and joined me.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you? Where can they consume your content? All of that.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at it's Alexis Haynes. I have a course, an online course called the Life Reset course, which is an incredible space. You can visit my website, recoveringfromreality.com, and check out the Life Reset course. And I have my own podcast, which is also titled Recovering from Reality. I have a book on Amazon right now, also titled Recovering from Reality, if you want to take a deeper look into my world. And the podcast is on hiatus right now, indefinitely, but I think I'm gonna come back in the fall. But there's like over 20 episodes? There's like over 120
I think
episodes of
so.
content.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and if you join Life Reset course, you get to see me taking notes every week, so you
Yeah.
get to come hang out.
Yes. If you join my Reset course, you get to be on the calls and see Sadie's beautiful face every Wednesday night.